I have to say it's a little weird being in a Lunch and Learn and actually being your Lunch and Learn presenter, so you got to bear with me as I kind of work my way through this transition. Who here has never been to one of these Lunch and Learns before or is sort of new to Greenville CAN? Okay, I'm going to talk just to the four of you, all right, because all the other folks have heard me too much. But while Paul pulls up my stuff, so I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit. The main thing that we wanted to, when I say we, our leadership team, one of the reasons why we wanted to do a Lunch and Learn is because we're like, Greenville CAN's never done a Lunch and Learn before. And so a lot of folks, the only experience they have with Greenville CAN is coming to these Lunch and Learns. So you go, what's Greenville CAN? And they go, oh, they do that Lunch and Learn stuff. So we wanted to, which we do, and it's great, but this is just a tiny piece of kind of the big picture. So what I wanted to try to make happen today is, one, is to reconnect everyone with the big picture of why Greenville CAN exists. Reconnect with who is Greenville CAN, and ultimately it's all of you in the room, and then share some of the things that came from our strategic planning process, and then talk about our new home with the Barbara Stone Foundation. So, and in the middle of that, we'll be happy to take questions and different things, and I might actually get some feedback from you on some different things that we're looking at as well. So, forgive me as I kind of jump around just a little bit, but, and I've never got to use the board before. Equity. So big picture, Greenville CAN stuff. So when we first came together a long time ago, it was really based off of a lunch that Barbara Stone Foundation had. They said if we just bring some providers together that we know and feed them lunch, we don't really have an agenda, it seems like good things would come from this. And so they invited, a couple of handfuls of people to the offices at 10 at the top. We sat there, we had a delicious lunch, and we didn't have an agenda, but when we went around the room, we were surprised at a couple of things. One, we were surprised that not everyone in the room knew everyone in the room. And so that was kind of our community's kind of small. There's only a few of it, we didn't think at the time there's a bunch of us serving people with disabilities. And so that kind of struck us. And then we were also surprised at how many people weren't in the room. And so we pulled a little committee together and we said, you know what we need? If this is hard for people to connect with service, or if this is hard for us to know who all is doing what in the community, how hard must it be for people with disabilities or people looking for services? So we said, let's form a committee and let's build the end-all be-all website that has everything that you could ever want. So we brought people into the room, and as we were doing that, people kept saying, well, pull up Family Connections website, and pull up DVSN, and pull up CDS, and pull up all this. And what we realized is that the problem was not necessarily that there was no one trying to create the end-all be-all website of everything. The problem was sort of that there was too many people trying to do that, and none of us were working together. And so you would end up pulling up something that promised to be the end-all be-all, but that had incomplete information on it, or it wasn't fully built out. And so in the middle of that, we said, is our goal to build a website, or is our goal to make it easier to live in our community with the disability or not? And we said, let's try to make our community a better place to live for people with disabilities. So our focus is not people with disabilities. We're not trying to do anything to, people with disabilities or any of that. We're focused, because that's, all of you as service providers, you're actually working with people with disabilities. Our premise is that if we all come together, that we can make our community a better place to live for people with disabilities. And when we first came together, we got all excited. We based our model off of something called Live Well Greenville. And Live Well Greenville is an obesity, started off as the obesity task force, and I was on it, and I gained all this weight to be on it, and then I realized we were trying to prevent it instead of, I prepared hard for that thing, and we met for like a year and a half, and we'd sit around the table, and we'd all talk about what we're doing, but at the same time, nothing was actually getting done together. We were just sharing. And then we finally decided if we divide and conquer, we can get something done. And so I don't know if anyone's got kids in the public school system, but all the new menus and all the healthy food, all of that started from Live Well Greenville. We said, let's bring school people together, right, and say what can happen at schools, because we have kids at school, to make kids healthier, and so that's where that came from. And so we said, let's take that same model and apply it to Greenville CAN. Let's look at different areas. And so Barbara Stone Foundation funded some research, and we identified what are some of the pinch points in our community of where we might have opportunities for improvement. And we identified recreation and supportive services and employment, a handful of other things that came out of that. And we said, who wants to, housing, we said, who wants to work on these things? And so we had people come together and we created work groups around these different areas. To kind of take this divide and conquer approach. It was all volunteer at the time. I worked for Greenville County Rec. And in the middle of this, we said we need a staff person, and so Thrive stepped up and said, you know, we can make this happen for a little bit. So they actually employed me and gave my time to Greenville CAN, which was an amazing gift to the community and kind of unheard of. And we did that. And then, you know, it was time to kind of figure out a different home for this, because Thrive can only do that for so long. And so when that time came, we reached out to some foundations, and they said, what you're doing is too important for this to kind of fall apart. And so we're going to give you money to do strategic planning, and we're going to support me as the staff person. And the hope is you'll find a home that can be sustainable and make sense for the long haul, right? So instead of a temporary home, we wanted, you know, a long haul home. And that's where we engaged in our strategic planning process. Many of you probably came to a focus group or a survey or something like that. And what we realized is that when we first started Greenville CAN, we took all these great ideas and all this energy, threw it up against the wall, and basically kind of stepped back and said, what's stuck? And we realized that there were some things, for example, we had a housing work group, Stacy was on that, and we realized that housing was not within our sphere of influence and control as a coalition in terms of beds and all this kind of stuff. And so we kind of spun our wheels on that. Now, affordable, accessible housing, we realized that that's a table that we should have a seat at, and so we have someone involved with the city that's representing people with disabilities. The Greenville Housing Authority has been coming to our lunch and learns and learning about services. And so we started realizing there's some things that we want to be the table that people sit around, and there's some things that we need to make sure someone is sitting around the table representing people with disabilities. So kind of in the big picture, that's kind of how we got to this point. But equity though, so when you think about what we're trying to do, I always look at Greenville CAN is when you think about the services that you provide as a provider, you're meeting needs today. You know, people, you know, need X and you're providing X, and we need that to happen. But when we start thinking about the needs of tomorrow, you know, for employment, you know, folks need employment, job coaching and things like that, but how do we increase equity, you know, equitable opportunities for people with disabilities in the long haul? And that requires work that, you know, changing culture, you know, building, you know, trying to change mindsets and how people view people with disabilities. And that's stuff that we can work on now, but some of the stuff that we work on, we might not see the impact of that for generations, you know? And so when we start talking about equity, our real vision in all of this is a community with equitable opportunities for all. And imagine that if when you start thinking about that, whether it's in, you know, employment or recreation or what have you, how can we increase equity? Now, equity is not necessarily equal, right? There's a great cartoon that I love that talks about equity. So, you know, you've got a fence and you've got people at different heights or whatever trying to see over the fence. If you give everyone equal treatment, everyone gets the same size box. But that doesn't mean everyone can see, you know, over the fence. Equity is people get what they need to be able to participate equally in our society. All right, now there's a new cartoon that says justice is if you have the fence and it's this chain link fence so you can see through it. You can carry this in a lot of different directions. But equity, though, is you give people what they need to be able to participate. And that, for Greenville CAN, is the big picture of all of this. Is how do we get our community to start thinking about equity? And when you start thinking about equity, that's not just for people with disabilities. That's our focus. But then you start thinking, you know, income, you know, homeless, I mean, the whole 9 yards, that equity kind of mindset, because one of the things that you have to counter is people saying, well, you're giving these people an unfair advantage. You're not giving them, they still have the same view as everybody else. Now, with people with disabilities, you're starting way down here, all right? And we all know that, right? So that makes it even harder for us. And one of the things, the presentation I get given to some funders that we're hoping will fund us for the next few years. But I'm preaching to the choir here, but most people who aren't familiar with people with disabilities, when they see a gentleman like this, do you think they're looking at, when they see this, are they thinking, oh gosh, there's someone who's going to want to come out and use our public parks? Or are they thinking, oh gosh, this could be my next great employee? Or are they thinking, oh wow, this is someone that we ought to elect to run for Congress, right? No, they're looking and they're saying, here's a disabled person. They're seeing this person for what they can't do as opposed to what they can do. And so part of what our big picture mission is to make it, if we're successful generationally, when people see an individual like this, they're going to see this person for what they can do instead of what they can't do. They're going to see them as an individual with a disability, and they're not going to assume how that disability might limit what they might want to do, what they're capable of doing, or things like that. Does that kind of make sense? And sort of the model on this, or whatever, and I don't know if this is true, I just made this up, but in my mind, this is... Karen's, I call her boss lady because she's the chair of the Barbara Stone Foundation, and so she's just like, oh, for God's sake, she's killing me. But it was based on some other things. But if you think about it, though, I think there's a cycle. And some of this came, I used to raise money for Camp Spearhead when we were building a new facility. And it was kind of an eye-opener. I talked to some folks, and I remember I was talking to this one person, they were all fired up and everything, and they go, how much money are you trying to raise? And I was like, we're trying to raise $10 million. And forgive me for saying this, he goes, ain't that a lot of money for them retarded people? And I was like, are you kidding me? And it hit me. I was like, this person didn't see people with disabilities, especially intellectual disabilities, as fully human. You know, and so when you think about the cartoon with the person way down in the weeds, right, or dug down in the hole, if you are not seen as fully human, then you've got a long way to go to be seen as equal and have equity. So, well, what happens is that, in my opinion, is I feel like when you have folks that aren't familiar with people with disabilities, there's already deep-seated societal things. You know, it was within our generation that people were in institutions or were considered, you know, contagious and all that kind of stuff. So you have this kind of built into our thing, and as a result, you know, you have, let's see, I know how to get it back, so I've seen a lot of people do that before. As a result, you have this lack of access because, you know, people are thinking, well, why would we need to make the route to a dugout accessible? People with wheelchairs don't, you know, they're not going to play baseball. Or why would we need to make you know, this program open to, you know, people with intellectual disabilities, because that's not what they do. You know, why would we need to make this route through the restaurant, you know, because I've never seen someone with a disability here. So when you have this lack of access, what that creates is people don't see people with disabilities, right? So that leads to a lack of awareness, which then validates their limiting assumptions and stereotypes, which then reinforce these deep-seated beliefs. So it becomes this cycle. So at Greenville CAN, and it makes sense. I mean, I kind of made that up, but still, I mean, doesn't that sort of, right? It is based on a different model. So I'm not, you know, it's not, don't worry, Karen, it actually has some. And I could almost talk about the other model, but I'm not. I'm going to pull it back. So, but for us with Greenville CAN, part of what we're focused on as we move forward is if we can increase the data that people see. All right, I keep seeing it. Okay, this is based on something called the ladder of inference. And the ladder of inference that says that in the room or in any room, there's all this data, right? And then we choose data from what we see, and then we add meaning to that data. And then based on that data, we make assumptions, and based on those assumptions, we adopt beliefs, right? So you can't change someone's beliefs by saying you should believe something different. You have to change someone's beliefs by changing the data that they see so that then they can make different assumptions, and then that changes their beliefs. So when someone goes to a playground and sees somebody with a disability there, right? First they're going, well, gosh, I've never seen anybody with a disability at the playground, but then all of a sudden it starts to change the way they see that person with a disability. I never thought people with disabilities would want to do X, Y, and Z. When you see people with disabilities volunteering, when you go into the workplace, you know, John's hanging out, and all of a sudden his new person that he's working with is legally blind and kicking butt, and then he goes home to his family and he's like, honey, you ain't gonna believe who my new work partner is. They can't see a lick, and she's just getting it done, you know? And then all of a sudden the family is going, gosh, I never thought about it like that. And so it starts to get pervasive. So if we can increase access, then that allows us to increase awareness. Now, along with this, a lot of folks, and you've seen it, don't really know how to interact with people with disabilities. There's a discomfort level there, and it kind of goes back to this, and people get weird about it. So there's some proactive things that can be done by all of us to help people, to meet people where they're at and kind of bring them along. So for example, our employment consultant, Laura, she's working with businesses to help them remove barriers that they have seen and unseen to employment. Well, one of the first things that happens when we start working with these businesses is we'll bring Able, South Carolina in to do, you know, disability etiquette training, because people get freaked out as an HR manager, I know legally I can't discriminate against someone with a disability. But as a person, all of a sudden Sharon's in front of me and she's got cerebral palsy, and I'm like, I don't really know. Do I talk about that? Do I not? Do I touch a wheelchair? Do I not? You know, do I have to talk really loud to somebody with a, you know? And so people just don't know. And we found that most people won't ask and say that's what they need, but when you give it to them, they go, oh my gosh, thank you so much. And so there's things that we can do with that. But one of the things that we're doing that I love the most is in Barbara Stone Foundation is leading the way on this, and Thrive Upstate also did it our first year too, is we've, for the past 3 years now, we've had individuals with disabilities that would need to have some level of accommodation or clearly look at someone and go, they have a disability, participate in the Leadership Greenville program. And so you've got all these leaders who have never had people with disabilities in their program before, now are experiencing, you know, for 9 months, people with disabilities. And what's happening is, when I talk to the participants, they say, yeah, when I started, you know, I remember Laura Bratton, who's blind, she goes, when I started, I was the blind girl. And by the time I was done, I was their friend Laura, you know, and having that transition. But all those people are then talking to their family, their coworkers, all of that. And so that awareness piece is just critical. And so when we focus on employment, our purpose is not just, yes, it's good for the individual to have a job, but it's also good for the big picture to have people working in employment because it counters these limiting assumptions and stereotypes. So does that all kind of make sense? Does that seem like a good thing for us to engage in? You know, and I know, like with the final rule talking about community integration and all that, you know, that's one of the reasons why it's so important, you know, is to get people out in the community to see people doing different stuff. I get really excited about that part, so I kind of go off. Let me see a question on that. Since we started in 2013, we have had some good accomplishments. ADA coordinators. By law, every government entity with 50 or more people are supposed to have ADA coordinators. The city, the county, none of these people really had these folks. Now they all do. We've got them involved with us. They've gone through training. That was kind of the big system thing. And when I say system thing, the changes, you know, there's the awareness piece that we're working on, but when it comes to changes, our focus is on system and policy level change. And so if all of a sudden, you know, Greenville CAN isn't going to go and try to write a grant to hire, you know, people to run some program or what have you. That's a good thing to do. That's not what Greenville CAN is going to do, because, you know, we're focused on system changes that will go on in the event that we all get hit by a bus, right? Anyway, so transportation, we're at the table. When they started doing the transportation study, nobody was talking about the fact that all the bus stops were inaccessible. And so we worked with them and and helped them do an assessment of all their bus stops, and only 5% of the 500 bus stops in Greenville County and all the cities could even be considered accessible, and that's not even ADA compliant. That's just like actually could be considered accessible. And by federal law, they're all supposed to be. And so, you know, that awareness is there, and all of a sudden now disabilities has become part of that conversation. Recreation and inclusion. And inclusion, I think, is a key word on this. If you start looking at increasing recreation equity for people with disabilities, we could all go out and write grants, and we could start a whole bunch of new programs specifically for people with disabilities. And we've got great programs here specifically for people with disabilities that, you know, Camp Spearhead, Special Olympics, Recess, that are kicking butt. That's probably not the most professional thing to say. I could say it in a different way, but, you know, everyone loves these programs. But if all of a sudden we wanted to really increase that recreational equity, it's not sustainable to create all these grant-driven non-inclusive programs. But if we can work with providers to help them learn how to be more inclusive of people with disabilities, from the Americans with Disabilities perspective, all the summer camps and day programs and all that kind of, you know, day camps and whatnot, all of them are supposed to you know, be able to accommodate people with disabilities. The challenge is, A, not everyone knows that they're supposed to, but the bigger challenge is not everyone really knows how to do that in an authentic way. So how can we partner with providers to help increase inclusion? And then all of a sudden you have this sustainable way of greatly increasing opportunities. We had and then in terms of trying to do that, we had some folks from Greenville County Rec, City of Greenville, and some of the other YMCA and some other providers participate in an inclusion training that from a sustainability perspective, the Inclusion Collaborative in South Carolina, they paid for the training because they had a grant. And then in South Carolina, or Greenville County, all we did, Barbara Stone Foundation funded lunch for the training. So for basically $200, we were able to provide inclusion training to a number of different providers that then can go back and start to do that. So that's kind of when you start talking about sustainability, that's really what we're looking at. Civic engagement, I already talked about leadership, Greenville. And then in the employment front, where we're at with employment is you've got all these providers, Thrive, Book Rehab, SOS, and Engaged Employment, Terry, folks that are doing employment type stuff, and then you've got different employers out there. What we realize is how can we get the providers to have a little bit more kumbaya so that when they go to an employer, if they can't meet someone's need, they can refer it to somebody else. But then how can we work with employers to, one, get them excited about the idea of hiring people with disabilities, but then two, help them renew some of those barriers. So some of our successes, Michelin got involved with us, drank the Kool-Aid hard, and they built a new distribution center in Spartanburg. They hired a company to run it, but they were requiring that company to hire 25% of their staff be people with disabilities. And so that was a huge kind of shift. But what our target has been is how can we target thought leader companies to get them to follow kind of the Walgreens model, with the thought that being that as they go, other companies go. And so since that time, and parallel, had nothing to do with us, you've got Bon Secours doing Project Search, which is amazing. We've got them involved in our leadership and our employment stuff. Laura's been working with GHS. You've got Michelin there, and then there's a whole list of other companies that Laura's been reaching out to do that. But we also have the providers on board, and one of the things we're working on now is working on this sort of regional provider single point of contact sort of model, which is going to be pretty exciting and definitely a system change as we move forward. And what's really exciting too is prior to all this time, two of our largest providers, Thrive Upstate and Book Rehab, never really worked as well together, and now Tyler's loaning his mountain bike to the David Turnipseed that runs vocational rehabilitation. There's a friendship there, there's a working relationship there, and they're partnered together working on some GHS stuff, and it's just, the kumbaya part of that is helpful, because part of the mentality of Greenville CAN is let's take our logoed hats off. I used to say take your logoed shirt off, and that just seemed kind of weird after a while. So take your hat and logo off, put it on the table, and let's work together to do what's right for people with disabilities and not worry so much about just our own entity. And that seems like it's nice to see leadership of these organizations doing that together. Talk about that. So for our planning, we put together a committee, and I'm not going to go through everyone on the committee, but we had a nice mix of organizational leaders, self-advocates, people with disabilities, people that have been involved with us and not. One of the persons, Kim, was the ADA coordinator for the city of Malden, and we really reached out to the network. So we did 5 focus groups that had 55 people at it, and we did 24 interviews that ranged everywhere from county council people to people with disabilities to GHS, to all kinds of different folks involved in that. So we got a lot of feedback. And what we heard from people is, in terms of the purpose of Greenville CAN, is people ultimately said bringing people together, connecting folks, and then advocating. And so as we move forward with our new strategic plan, we've really kind of centered around those places. And then strengths, the big picture approach, our positive approach, and then the number of organizations affiliated with Greenville CAN. I want to talk about the positive. Am I killing you? Am I just like going to hanging in there? All right. So don't let me go over time. Positive approach. We got feedback from folks saying, sometimes you're Dr. Jekyll and sometimes you're Mr. Hyde, right? Sometimes you're the positive voice of disabilities and we love everybody and you're just doing great whatever you're doing and we're going to love you and we're going to help bring you along. And then we had some other folks saying, sometimes you scare us a little bit because you've got some folks that are involved with you that on one hand are helpful and on the other hand kind of threatening to sue us, and we don't really know if we can, there were some mixed messages. So in our strategic, and of course I'm always the friendly voice, in our strategic planning, we purposely chose to embrace a positive approach. We're not going to shame anybody. We're not going to sue anybody. We can't. We're not even a legal entity. But we're not going to sue anybody. We're not encouraging others to sue people. We're not, whatever. Our belief is that, where we are is where we are right now. And we have a deep belief that everybody who's involved in where we are right now ultimately wants to do the right thing. And so let's work together and let's make that happen. Let's celebrate where we're at now. And celebrating where we're at now doesn't mean that we don't recognize that we still have a long way to go. But we think that it's easier to keep people at the table and meet them where they're at and then walk forward, as opposed to you should be doing this, you should be doing that, and all that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of the philosophy of of where we're at. Not everyone totally agrees with that philosophy. I'm just going to put it out there. Some people are saying, we need to fight the man, and there's a place for that for people that want to do that. That's not what we do as Greenville CAN. So, so that's very important. And then with the number of organizations affiliated with Greenville CAN, one of the things that we want to do moving forward, we got a lot of feedback from folks that said, we asked them, we said, are you part of Greenville CAN? And they go, I don't know. I get the emails, and we folks kept saying, it's like, I don't know, did I do something to become part? Somehow I'm on Mike's email list, I mean, what does that mean? And so we're working on trying to figure out, and people said, we want an opt-in process, but we don't want it to be so complicated that we have to take it, and whatever. And so we're trying to develop a process that would allow individuals to opt in, as well as organizations to opt in, and to do that in a way that is simple. And the thought behind it would be is, to opt in, you would, and we also got feedback, people said that they wanted to know who else was involved in Greenville CAN, so we need to capture some information. So we're going to develop an opt-in process where if you want to say, yes, I'm part of Greenville CAN, there's no money involved, it's free, it's not like you got to, pay, but people, that you'd be willing to give us your name and some information about you so we can have a little bit of a membership directory or whatever. And by choosing to do that, you're saying, I feel pretty good about some of these core ideals, maybe the equity issue and some, things that are Big Tent enough for us all to get behind them. When I say Big Tent, we've got a lot of different organizations doing a lot of different things, and one of the things I found in the disability world is not all of these organizations always see eye to eye about everything, but there's certain things where we can all agree. I think we can all agree that people with disabilities should have equal opportunities and equitable opportunities. I think we can all agree that people should be able to access buildings. I think we can all agree that people with disabilities want to have a meaningful and productive life, and so what are those things? And so that's kind of our opt-in process. As we get closer to making that happen, we're probably going to reach out to you for feedback on some of that. And if you have any feedback on that after this, I'd love to get it, because we don't want to make it super hard for people. But in just a quick show of hands, if we had an opt-in process and I emailed you and said, all right, you can opt in, is that something that you would take 2 minutes to actually do? Nellie said, I'll do it. What that will do for us is, as a coalition, and that's what we are, our ability to influence change is directly related to the size of our base. And right now, I've got 1,200 something people that get my emails, and that's what it used to be. If you want to be part of Greenville CAN, just give me your email address. And when we have an opt-in process, it's going to strengthen that even more. And then the other part of that is, when you opt in, we're going to give you the opportunity to say, I'm really interested in these different things. And when I talk about our model in just a second, that gives us the ability to say, hey, we're pulling together a group to talk about how can we increase opportunities for adults with intellectual disabilities, and we want some ideas on that. We're pulling together a group, and so we want to be able to pull together different groups for a short amount of time and engage people, and so it'll make it easier for us to do that. So. Opportunities, and like I said before, when we started, we threw a bunch of stuff on the wall, and some things didn't really stick. And so with our plan, instead of choosing to do more, we're actually kind of choosing to do less. So for the next 3 years, and I say that because these things seem to be the most important things, and if we're still working on this eons down the road, it means we're probably doing the right things. And so for the next 3 years, our opportunities that we found are employment, local advocacy, and finding that common agenda, encouraging civic leadership and engagement, and I'm going to talk more about that in a second. So ADA and access, there seems to be a need to do a little bit of data and research to kind of quantify some different stuff. I know one of the things that Laura's working on, or wants to work on, is we keep saying, how many people in Greenville County are work ready but not receiving services and getting that. I mean, there's a lot of kind of talk around some stuff, but we can quantify some of this information. And we want to redefine membership and governance, like I said. Let's go back. I think our vision statement, I said, is a fully inclusive community with equitable opportunities for all. That's the vision. Obviously, everyone's got equitable opportunities. Our mission is more focused specifically on people with disabilities and making our community a better place. And I'm going to jump, core strategy. I'm going to jump right to core strategy. This is kind of lays out kind of the big picture things of how we go about doing it. Now remember, when I say we, who's we? It's all of us. Well, all right. We fulfill our mission by serving as a positive champion for disability-related issues, engaging individuals with disabilities. This is something that we didn't do good in Greenville CAN, or do well, in Greenville CAN 1.0. But in 2.0, this is a massive focus for us, is we want to engage people with disabilities in Greenville CAN, but also in our community. So that's a big thing. Connecting and convening community partners, facilitate action, all while leveraging our collective influence, collective resources to influence system change. So in a nutshell, that's how we collectively go about trying to make things happen. I'm going to jump ahead to a couple of things, so bear with me. Yes. Our new structure. Our home is the Barbara Stone Foundation. They started Greenville CAN. They've been providing all the meals. If you've ever gotten a meal from me or whatever, thank the Barbara Stone Foundation. Website, logo, the whole 9 yards. They've been, super supportive of all this. They decided to be our new home, and as part of that, they've never had a staff person before, at least not in the recent history or whatever. And so, when they made that choice, they had been primarily a grant-making body that then dabbled in influence, and that's what led to the creation of Greenville CAN. They made the decision to say, we're going to be primarily an influence advocacy type of organization, but we're still going to maintain granting, and our granting is really going to be to spur innovation and to catalyze change, knowing that sometimes to make a change for tomorrow, you got to make something happen today, and how can we find those innovators and things like that. And so as part of that, I've joined them now, and I'm the executive director of the Barbara Stone Foundation, and then as Thrive gave my time to Greenville CAN, Barbara Stone is reassigns the chunk of my time to lead Greenville CAN, and they're all sort of wrapped in one. So I've got two different little hats, a little BSF one, a little GCAN hat on, and I like put them on different times during different meetings. Our leadership team, we had a massive leadership team before, and it was kind of one of those things like, oh, be on our leadership team. So we had like 34 people on our team, and it wasn't, it was, we had good people, but it wasn't really strategically thought out. That team is closed its doors, and we've opened the doors on a new coalition management team. And Dana McConnell, who's the executive director here, is the chair of our team. But it's got 13 members, so it's got the, for employment, Alex Garvey is the chair of our employment team, and Janie Neely is sitting in for him and representing him on our coalition management team. Civic engagement is Chris Sparrow with Able, South Carolina. He's also a Leadership Greenville graduate. Partnership engagement communications team is Susan Leidy. She's now with Help Me Grow in GHS. Our transition team is Joy Ivester is the chair of that, and she's with Center for Disability Resources. Our ADA team is Kim Hamill, who has been the ADA coordinator for the city of Holland. Recreation, our chair of that is our own Miss Nancy Callahan in the back of the room, who actually, I went to a meeting the other day and I saw some people and I'm like, what are y'all doing here? It's like, oh, we're having our GCAN meeting. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's actually happening. And then we have an evaluation team, Sally Wills from Leadership, from Livewell Greenville is the chair of that. So all of them sit on this team. But then we also have Miss Taylor Krulak, who is one of our Leadership Greenville graduates and also is a person with a disability. We have someone who is an adult with high-functioning autism on our team, and we also have a young man that participated in the recess program with Williams syndrome, who is on our team. And so we purposely, and so when you look at our team, almost half of the folks there have a disability. We have a couple of parents, and we have some professionals on it. And so we're being a lot more thoughtful about that. The other thing with these teams is one of the things we realized in our old work group model is we had this kind of come one, come all type approach, which was great, but the problem is all of a sudden you get 20 people around the table to influence, and let's say recreation. How am I doing on time?
5 minutes.
Oh, I'm doing it. Out of the 20 people around the table, maybe 2 or 3 of them actually could influence recreation. So we got a lot of good ideas, which was helpful, but then when we went to the implementation phase, you would get frustrated a little bit because we didn't really have the right people around the table. So this model, what we realized is we want tiny little teams. These teams are only 2 to 3 people. Our employment team is Alex Garvey, Janie Neely, the person that runs Project Search that works for Alex. Tyler, I want to say Taylor. The whole Tyler thing kills me. And David Turnipseed with Book Rehab. So they're going to own the employment part of our strategic plan. Doesn't mean they're going to do it all, but they're going to own it. So we don't need to have 25 people on our work group. We've got them. Same thing with these other teams. But at different points of time, there's different things that need to happen. And so what we've realized is you can't get the right people around the table and keep them there for a long time, but you can get them around the table and keep them for a short time. So if we're working on a single point of contact thing when it comes to employment, we can get the head of Oak Rehab and Thrive and Goodwill and SC Works and all that around the table for a little bit to work on that project, and then when they're done, they go away. Same thing with recreation. We can get the leaders of all of our Parks and Rec departments to sit around the table once, maybe twice. They're not going to sit around it very long. So we've got this ability to do ad hoc project teams. When you join and opt into Greenville CAN, y'all will be, when we need someone to form one of these teams, we can reach out to you because there's going to be different times that we don't know who we need right now, but we want to have the flexibility to pull people in. So that's that level of folks there. So we're moving away from our old work group model to this. Now, at the same time, our employment work group that we have now, a lot of energy in the room. We've got good people representing a lot of different organizations there, and all the employment stuff that we're doing now all came from ideas that came from that group. But what we've realized is one of the main things that's happening in that group is, one, we're getting ideas, but two, it's a great networking, kumbaya building between these different people who are on the ground doing employment services. So we want to keep doing that, but instead of putting the pressure on them for them to be a work group where we have to have outcomes, we're going to call it a roundtable networking group. We're going to meet at whatever frequency that group wants to meet. We're going to feed them like we always do. Whoever wants to be part of that group, come one, come all. And the focus is we're just going to focus on building relationships, testing ideas, generating ideas. But then some ideas will come up that we need to pull a project team together on or what have you. So it gives you some flexibility. Same thing with our old Having Fun group. A lot of people want to talk about recreation, but there's only a handful that can influence. We can have roundtable groups around inclusion, roundtable groups around recreation opportunities to try to increase kind of that word of mouth or whatever. Now, this bottom thing, the Coalition Partner Network, anybody that is opted into Greenville CAN is part of our overall coalition. And we're going to have at least one meeting annually that's going to be a big kumbaya love fest, let's talk about where we are and where we're going, and everybody will be part of that. And so the goal is to provide multiple levels for people to be engaged. And the ultimate goal of all of this with the new model is we want everyone who's involved in Greenville CAN to feel that we are all Greenville CAN. Yes, I'm Tom Beeson who runs Indwellings, but I'm also Greenville CAN. We want people to really identify with that, have a sense of ownership with that, because Greenville CAN is not me. It's not the Barbara Stone Foundation. It's not these people right here. It's everybody in the room who shares that vision of equitable opportunities for all and making our community a better place to live for disabilities. And so that's what we want. We want everyone involved to be an ambassador to pull others into the fold. And you don't have to be an organization leader. You don't have to be a parent. You don't have to be a person with a disability. All you have to do is share that vision. You can get involved, and then we'll find different ways for folks to get involved. I could talk for a lot longer, but I know we're getting close to our time, so I'm going to stop right now. Questions, thoughts, comments? Was this helpful at all? Kind of for the big picture? Anyone?
The lunch and learns will continue.
Yes. Yeah, no, the lunch and learns, we got tons of feedback that this is one of the favorite things that people like. And if you think about it, we're doing the stuff we set up here, but what I love about the lunch and learns is the relationships that get created here, which I think is exciting. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention to you too, Oconee County, Pickens County, and Anderson County have come together and they're forming Foothills CAN. And they are following our model, but they're doing it in a tri-county thing. And they're going to have a kickoff event on September 17th. They're bringing in Randy Lewis, who is the guy that did all the Walgreens stuff. But it's really exciting to see what their priorities are and what their vision, because they've talked about this and they followed our model, but what we've done here has had significant influence there, and it's just really neat to see what they're doing. And they're going to do lunch and learns, and their model is a little bit different than ours, but their philosophy and who they are and what they're all about and what they're trying to make happen, is all the same. So, and Tyler actually was, you're one of the folks that kind of helped start the ball rolling. A little bit. Now Mike Cannon's the guy, and anyway, so we're pretty excited about that. And then there also is a Charleston CAN that started about the same time we did and kind of modeled after us. Natalie, did you have a question? Or you just raising your hand? Go ahead.
So the Oconee County CAN, are they still going to be able to provide parents are gonna have access as well?
They're still in the newbie, so it'll be Foothills CAN, but they've started a little bit different than they've really been basing theirs off of the existing DSM boards, folk rehab, businesses, colleges, and universities. What they haven't done yet is really pull in nonprofit providers yet and people yet. I think they're trying to get their stuff together, and then they're going to reach out to that. And I'll start sharing information about them as they have more stuff to share, so that you'll be able to see what's going on.
Mike, how often do you think your networking goes to meeting?
I think with the employment, I think we keep it that quarterly schedule that we're already doing, but at the same time, that group could decide to meet more or less. We're going to be more fluid with that, and we're also going to create, what I'd like to do with these networking groups, one of the things we realized with all of this is, in our old model, I tried to be at every one of these meetings and kind of tried to run the show and all that kind of stuff, and we realized that was fine for a little bit, but then that becomes a limitation. And so what I got so excited when I saw Nancy and her team meeting the other day is I didn't set the meeting up. I didn't even know they were meeting, and I didn't have to be there. And so, we're trying to distribute leadership, and so we're going to do the same thing with that employment group, is to try to give more ownership of that group to those folks. And then my role is really just to kind of help logistically and things such as that. Other questions? All right. I encourage you to stay around, talk to each other. And when I talked about what Elizabeth Piper's doing, it's life coaching and counseling for people with disabilities, not for you. So, I guess you can really use if you wanted to, but I think it's really more for people with disabilities. Y'all, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you next month.